Dr. Sarah Chun had been working as a field medic in the remote mountains of Alaska for 3 years. She had seen injured bears, wounded eagles, and sick caribou, but nothing prepared her for what she would find on that cold October morning in 2019. The emergency call came in at 5:30 a.m. A park ranger had spotted something moving near the old mining trail, something that looked like it was in serious trouble. Sarah grabbed her medical kit and headed out in her Jeep, the headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. The drive took 45 minutes on rough terrain. When she finally reached the location, she could hear soft whimpering sounds coming from behind a cluster of rocks. She approached carefully, not knowing what to expect. What she found broke her heart. A young wolf pup, probably only 3 months old, lay curled up against the cold stone. Its gray fur was matted and dirty, and it was so weak it could barely lift its head. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what she saw crawling all over the little animal's body. Millions of tiny parasites covered the pup from head to tail. They moved like a living carpet across its fur, and Sarah could see that they had been feeding on the poor creature for weeks, maybe months. The pup's skin was raw and bleeding in many places. Its eyes were dull and sunken, showing signs of severe malnutrition. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, pulling on her gloves. She had never seen a parasite infestation this severe on any animal, let alone such a young one. The pup tried to growl when she approached, but the sound came out as more of a weak wheeze. Sarah could tell it was terrified, but it was too weak to run away. She spoke to it in a soft, gentle voice as she carefully examined the extent of the infestation. The parasites appeared to be a type of mite, but they were unlike anything she had studied in veterinary school. They were larger than normal mites, almost visible to the naked eye, and they seemed to be incredibly aggressive. They had burrowed into the pup's skin in some places, creating painful wounds that had become infected. Sarah's heart raced as she realized the gravity of the situation. This pup was dying. Without immediate medical intervention, it would be dead within hours. But treating such a severe infestation in a wild wolf pup was something she had never attempted before. She carefully wrapped the pup in a clean blanket, trying not to disturb the parasites too much. The little wolf was so weak that it didn't resist. Its breathing was shallow and labored, and Sarah could feel how thin and fragile it had become under all that matted fur. The drive back to her clinic felt endless. Sarah kept checking on the pup, worried that it might not survive the journey. She had called ahead to her assistant, Marcus, who was already preparing the treatment room when she arrived. "What do we have?" Marcus asked as Sarah carried the bundle into the clinic. "Massive parasite infestation," Sarah replied, gently placing the pup on the examination table. "I've never seen anything like this before." Marcus's eyes widened when Sarah pulled back the blanket. The parasites seemed to sense the light and warmth of the clinic, and they began moving even more actively across the pup's body. Some of them were so engorged with blood that they looked like tiny grapes. "Is it even savable?" Marcus asked quietly. Sarah looked at the suffering animal on her table. The pup's chest was still rising and falling, though barely. Its eyes were closed, but she could see the tiny muscles around them twitching with pain and exhaustion. "We have to try," she said firmly. "I won't give up on him." The first challenge was figuring out how to remove millions of parasites without killing the already weakened pup. Traditional treatments might be too harsh for such a young animal in this condition. Sarah spent the next 2 hours researching every possible treatment option, calling colleagues, and even reaching out to wildlife experts across the country. Meanwhile, Marcus set up in 4-line to provide the pup with fluids and nutrients. The little wolf was so dehydrated that finding a vein was difficult, but Marcus's steady hands managed to get the line in place. As the hours passed, Sarah developed a treatment plan. She would need to work in stages, carefully removing the parasites in sections while supporting the pup's body with medications and nutrients. It would be a delicate balance between aggressive treatment and keeping the young animal alive. The pup, which Sarah had started calling Spirit because of its determination to survive, remained unconscious for most of the first day. The parasites had drained so much of his blood and energy that his body was shutting down to preserve what little life remained. Dr. Martinez, a wildlife specialist from the state university, arrived that evening to help with the treatment. He took one look at Spirit and shook his head. "Sarah, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've never seen anything this severe," he said. The humane thing might be to put him out of his misery. But Sarah wasn't ready to give up. Something about the little pup's fighting spirit reminded her why she had become a veterinarian in the first place. Every animal deserved a chance to live, especially one this young. "Give me 3 days," she told Dr. Martinez. "If we can't make significant progress in 3 days, then we'll make that decision." Dr. Martinez agreed, and they began the painstaking process of removing the parasites. They worked under bright lights with magnifying glasses, carefully picking off the creatures one by one. Each parasite had to be completely removed, including the parts that had burrowed into Spirit's skin. The work was exhausting and heartbreaking. For every 100 parasites they removed, there seemed to be 1,000 more. Spirit's breathing remained shallow, and his heart rate was dangerously slow. On the second day, something remarkable happened. As Sarah was working on cleaning a particularly infected area near Spirit's ear, the pup opened his eyes for the first time since arriving at the clinic. He looked directly at her, and she could see intelligence and awareness in those dark brown eyes. "Hey there, little one," she whispered, gently stroking the small area of clean fur on his forehead. "You're going to be okay. I promise." Spirit's tail moved slightly, just a tiny twitch, but it was the first voluntary movement he had made. Sarah felt tears of hope fill her eyes. The breakthrough came on the 3rd day. Sarah had developed a special solution that seemed to repel the parasites without harming Spirit's already damaged skin. As she applied it to a section of his back, she watched in amazement as hundreds of parasites began dropping off on their own. "Marcus, come look at this," she called excitedly. The solution worked better than they had hoped. Within hours, they had cleared entire sections of Spirit's body. For the first time, they could see the true extent of the damage underneath, but they could also see healthy pink skin beginning to show through. Spirit seemed to sense the improvement too. He began drinking small amounts of water on his own, and he even managed to eat a few small pieces of soft meat that Sarah offered him. Word about Spirit's case began to spread through the veterinary community. Other doctors called to offer advice and support. A local news station picked up the story, and soon people from all over the region were calling to ask about the little wolf pup's progress. But the most surprising development came from an unexpected source. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a parasitologist from the Centers for Disease Control, called Sarah directly. "Dr. Chun, I've been following your case through some colleagues," she said. "The parasites you're dealing with, can you send me some samples? What you're describing doesn't match any known species in our database." Sarah carefully collected several of the parasites in special containers and shipped them overnight to Dr. Rodriguez's lab. The results that came back 3 days later changed everything. "Sarah, these aren't just unknown parasites," Dr. Rodriguez explained over the phone. "They appear to be a completely new species, and based on their behavior and reproductive rate, this could represent a serious threat to wildlife populations across North America." The implications were staggering. If these parasites could infest and nearly kill a healthy wolf pup this severely, what could they do to other animals? Were they spreading? How many other animals might already be infected? Spirit continued to improve each day. After 2 weeks of intensive treatment, he was parasite-free and beginning to gain weight. His fur was growing back in soft, healthy patches, and his eyes were bright and alert. He had even started playing with a small toy that Marcus had brought for him. But even as they celebrated Spirit's recovery, Sarah knew that his case was just the beginning of something much bigger. The discovery of these new parasites would require immediate investigation and action from wildlife authorities across the continent. Dr. Rodriguez arrived in Alaska the following week with a full research team. They needed to find out where these parasites had come from, how they were spreading, and, most importantly, how to stop them before they caused an ecological disaster. Spirit, now strong enough to move around the clinic on his own, seemed to understand that he was at the center of something important. He watched the researchers with curious eyes as they studied the samples and discussed their findings. "He's remarkable," Dr. Rodriguez observed, watching Spirit play with a rubber ball. "Most animals wouldn't have survived even a fraction of that infestation. His survival might be the key to understanding how to fight these parasites." Sarah nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Spirit's story was far from over. The little wolf who had nearly died in the mountains was about to become the most important animal in the fight against a threat that no one had seen coming. As she watched Spirit chase his ball across the clinic floor, his tail wagging with newfound health and energy, Sarah realized that saving one small life might have led to saving thousands of others. But the real work was just beginning, and the challenges ahead would test everything she thought she knew about wildlife medicine and conservation. The world was about to change, and it all started with one determined doctor who refused to give up on a dying wolf pup covered in millions of parasites. Spirit had survived against impossible odds, but his real purpose was only just becoming clear. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's research team worked around the clock in a temporary laboratory setup in the visitor center of Denali National Park. The samples from Spirit had revealed something that kept the scientists awake at night with worry. The new parasites, which they had officially named Parasitus spiritus in honor of the brave little wolf who had survived them, were unlike anything previously documented. Under the microscope, they showed characteristics that defied normal parasite behavior. They reproduced at an alarming rate, could survive in extreme cold conditions, and, most disturbing of all, they seemed to be adapting to different host animals. "Look at this," Dr. Rodriguez called to her colleague, Dr. James Wright, pointing at her computer screen. "I've compared the genetic sequence of the parasites we found on Spirit with samples we collected from the area. They're already showing genetic variations. They're evolving, and they're doing it fast." Dr. Wright studied the data with growing concern. In his 30 years of studying parasites, he had never seen anything adapt this quickly. Most parasites evolved over generations, taking years or even decades to show significant changes. These creatures were changing in a matter of weeks. Meanwhile, Sarah continued caring for Spirit at her clinic, but now her small facility had become the headquarters for the most important wildlife investigation in Alaska's history. Government officials, university researchers, and wildlife experts from across North America had descended on the remote location. Spirit himself seemed to enjoy all the attention. The young wolf had grown stronger every day, and his personality was beginning to emerge. He was playful, intelligent, and surprisingly gentle for a wild animal. He had formed a special bond with Sarah, following her around the clinic like a loyal dog. "He trusts you completely," observed Dr. Susan Martinez, an animal behaviorist who had come to study Spirit's recovery. "That level of trust between a wild wolf and a human is extremely rare. It's like he knows you save his life." Sarah smiled as she watched Spirit play with a rope toy. "Sometimes I think he saved mine too. This whole experience has taught me so much about what we're capable of when we don't give up." But the peaceful moments were becoming rare. Each day brought more disturbing news about the spread of the parasites. A team of field researchers had found 3 more infected animals within a 50-mile radius of where Spirit was discovered: 2 red foxes and a young lynx. All 3 animals had died before they could be brought in for treatment. The parasite load on each animal had been massive, similar to what Spirit had endured. "We're looking at a potential epidemic," Dr. Rodriguez announced during a meeting with state wildlife officials. "If these parasites continue to spread at this rate, they could devastate wildlife populations across Alaska and potentially into Canada." The state immediately implemented emergency protocols. Hunting and trapping in the affected area were suspended. Hiking trails were closed. Teams of veterinarians and researchers began systematic surveys of wildlife in expanding circles around the initial discovery site. What they found was both fascinating and terrifying. The parasites seemed to target young animals preferentially, though they could infest adults as well. They showed a preference for carnivorous mammals, but had also been found on herbivores. Most alarming of all, they appeared to be spreading through direct contact between animals, but also through shared food sources and possibly even through contaminated water supplies. Dr. Angela Foster, a veterinary epidemiologist from the University of Alaska, was brought in to map the spread pattern. Her computer models painted a grim picture. Based on current transmission rates and the parasite's reproductive cycle, we're looking at potential spread across the entire Alaskan interior within 6 months, she reported. If the parasites cross into Canada or the lower 48 states, the impact on North American wildlife could be catastrophic. The pressure to find a solution intensified. Teams of scientists worked 18-hour days, studying every aspect of the parasite's biology, searching for weaknesses that could be exploited. Spirit became the key to their research. His blood was tested daily, providing crucial information about how his body had fought off the infection. His immune system had developed antibodies that seemed effective against the parasites, but researchers struggled to understand why Spirit had survived when other animals had not. There's something different about his blood chemistry, Dr. Rodriguez explained to Sarah. His body produces a protein that the parasites seem unable to process effectively. If we can figure out how to synthesize this protein, we might be able to develop a treatment for other infected animals. But synthesizing the protein proved more difficult than expected. The compound was complex, requiring expensive laboratory equipment and processes that couldn't be easily replicated in the field where infected animals were being found. 3 weeks after Spirit's rescue, the investigation took an unexpected turn. Dr. Martinez was examining tissue samples from one of the deceased foxes when she made a startling discovery. The parasites aren't just feeding on blood, she announced to the assembled team. They're actually altering the host animal's neurological functions. Look at these brain tissue samples. Under the microscope, they could see that the parasites had been releasing chemicals that affected the fox's behavior. The animal's brain showed signs of changes that would have made it more aggressive and more likely to attack other animals, increasing the chances of spreading the parasites through bites and close contact. This isn't just a parasite, Dr. Wright said grimly. It's a behavioral modifier. It's actually changing how infected animals act to ensure its own survival and spread. The implications were chilling. If the parasites could alter animal behavior, infected wildlife might become more dangerous to humans as well as other animals. The scope of the crisis was expanding beyond simple wildlife conservation into potential public health concerns. Sarah found herself thinking about Spirit's behavior during his recovery. Had the parasites affected his brain as well? She watched him more carefully over the following days, looking for any signs of abnormal behavior. But Spirit seemed completely normal for a young wolf. He was curious, playful, and showed appropriate wariness around strangers while remaining comfortable with Sarah and Marcus. His recovery appeared to be complete, with no lasting effects from his ordeal. He might be our proof that early intervention can prevent permanent damage, Dr. Martinez suggested. The other animals we found had been infected for much longer. Spirit was young, and we caught the infestation relatively early in its progression. This observation led to a new strategy. Instead of waiting to find infected animals, the research team began implementing preventive measures. They developed a program to trap and examine healthy animals in the expanding perimeter around the initial outbreak zone, looking for early signs of infestation. The program was partially successful. They managed to catch and treat 2 young caribou and a fox with minor parasite loads, preventing what could have become severe infestations. But for every animal they helped, surveys suggested that several others remained in the wild with active infections. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Tommy Clearwater, a local Inupiat elder who had lived in the region for 70 years, visited the research camp with information that changed everything. My grandfather told stories about something like this, Tommy explained to the assembled scientists. It was in the 1890s, before the gold rush. Animals started getting sick with crawling bugs that made them crazy. Many died, but then it stopped suddenly after a hard winter. Dr. Rodriguez listened intently. Do you remember any details about how it stopped? Tommy nodded slowly. The old stories say the spirits of the land sent a great cold that killed the bugs. But my grandfather always said it wasn't spirits. He said the bugs couldn't survive when the temperature stayed below -40 for many days. This information sent the research team into overdrive. They began studying the parasite's temperature tolerance in controlled laboratory conditions. What they discovered was remarkable. The parasites could survive normal winter temperatures, but extended exposure to extreme cold caused them to become dormant and eventually die. We might not have to wait for a natural extreme cold snap, Dr. Foster realized. If we can identify active infestation sites, we might be able to use targeted cooling treatments to eliminate parasite populations. But implementing such a strategy would require massive coordination and resources. They would need to identify every infected area, develop methods for applying extreme cold treatments to large outdoor spaces, and do it all before the parasites spread beyond the current containment zone. Spirit watched all the activity with intelligent eyes, as if he understood that he was at the center of something important. He had grown considerably since his rescue, his gray fur now thick and healthy. Sarah estimated he weighed almost 40 pounds, well within normal range for a wolf pup his age. Sometimes I wonder what he thinks about all this, Sarah said to Dr. Rodriguez as they observed Spirit playing in a specially constructed outdoor enclosure next to the clinic. He's been through more in his short life than most animals experience in their entire lifespan, Dr. Rodriguez replied. But he seems remarkably well-adjusted. His resilience might be the key to understanding how other animals can survive this threat. As autumn progressed toward winter, the research team faced mounting pressure. Government officials wanted concrete solutions. Wildlife managers needed clear protocols for handling infected animals. And everywhere, the clock was ticking as parasite populations continued to grow and spread. The situation became even more complex when Dr. Foster's latest epidemiological models suggested that the parasites might be able to survive winter by going dormant inside their hosts, emerging again in spring with even larger populations. We're not just fighting a current infestation, she reported. We're potentially looking at an annual cycle that could establish these parasites as a permanent part of the ecosystem. The stakes couldn't have been higher. The team was racing against time and biology itself, trying to prevent what could become the most significant ecological disaster in Alaska's modern history. And at the center of it all was Spirit, the little wolf whose survival had revealed a threat that no one had seen coming. As winter approached and temperatures began to drop, everyone wondered whether the natural cold would be enough to stop the parasites, or whether human intervention would be necessary to prevent a catastrophe that could affect wildlife across an entire continent. Spirit's story had begun with one doctor's determination to save a dying animal. Now, it had become a race to save the wilderness itself. The first major snowfall came early that year, in late October. Sarah woke to find 6 inches of fresh snow covering the clinic grounds and Spirit's outdoor enclosure. She watched through her window as the young wolf experienced snow for the first time since his recovery, bouncing and playing in the white powder with pure joy. But the research team wasn't celebrating. Dr. Rodriguez's latest tests showed that the parasites were still active despite the cold. They had underestimated the creature's ability to adapt to dropping temperatures. They're burrowing deeper into their hosts, Dr. Wright reported during the morning briefing. The snow is actually insulating them, keeping them warm enough to remain active. This news sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Their hope that natural winter conditions would solve the crisis was fading quickly. Meanwhile, infected animal populations continued to grow, and new cases were being reported across a 1,000-square-mile area. The pressure reached a breaking point when Dr. Foster's team discovered something that changed the entire nature of the crisis. While examining tissue samples from a recently deceased moose, they found evidence that the parasites had begun to affect the animal's reproductive system. They're not just killing individual animals, Dr. Foster announced grimly. They're preventing successful reproduction. If this continues, we're looking at potential species collapse within a few generations. The federal government stepped in with emergency funding and resources. Within days, the small research operation in Alaska had become the center of the largest wildlife crisis response in North American history. Military logistics specialists arrived to coordinate supply chains. Veterinarians from across the continent volunteered their services. International wildlife organizations offered support and expertise. But even with massive resources, the challenge seemed overwhelming. The affected area was larger than many U.S. states, much of it accessible only by helicopter or snowmobile. Temperatures were dropping rapidly, making field work increasingly dangerous. And every day, more infected animals were discovered. The breakthrough came from Dr. Rodriguez's continued study of spirit's blood. Working 18-hour days in the laboratory, she finally isolated the specific protein that made spirit immune to the parasites. It's not just one protein, she explained excitedly to the assembled team. It's a combination of 3 different compounds that his body produces naturally. Together, they create an environment that the parasites cannot tolerate. More importantly, she had figured out how to synthesize the compound in large quantities using relatively simple laboratory equipment. The treatment could be mass-produced and deployed in the field. But there was a problem. The synthetic compound had to be injected directly into infected animals to be effective. With thousands of infected animals scattered across a vast wilderness area, individual treatment seemed impossible. Dr. Angela Martinez, who had been studying animal behavior throughout the crisis, proposed a radical solution. What if we don't have to catch every animal individually, she suggested. What if we can deliver the treatment through the food chain? Her idea was ambitious, but theoretically possible. They could create bait stations loaded with the synthetic compound, placed strategically throughout the infected area. Animals would consume the treated bait and receive protection against the parasites. The plan required precise coordination. Wildlife biologists mapped animal movement patterns and feeding habits. Chemists worked to create bait formulations that would appeal to different species while delivering effective doses of the treatment. Logistics teams planned the placement of thousands of bait stations across the wilderness. Spirit played a crucial role in testing the bait formulations. His willingness to try different foods helped researchers identify which combinations would be most appealing to wild animals. His continued good health also provided ongoing proof that the synthetic compound was safe and effective. He's like our quality control specialist, Sarah joked, watching Spirit enthusiastically sample a new fish-based bait mixture. If Spirit likes it, we know it's good. The first large-scale deployment began in early December. Teams of volunteers and government workers used helicopters, snowmobiles, and hiking to place bait stations throughout the infected area. Each station was equipped with motion-activated cameras to monitor which animals visited and how much bait was consumed. The results were encouraging. Within a week, cameras showed that various species were regularly visiting the stations. Bears, wolves, foxes, lynx, and many smaller mammals were all consuming the treated bait. More importantly, when research teams managed to capture and examine animals from areas where bait stations had been deployed, they found dramatically reduced parasite loads. The synthetic compound was working in the wild. But the real test came with the arrival of the deep winter cold. In mid-January, a massive Arctic air mass settled over Alaska, bringing temperatures that plunged to minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit and stayed there for 2 solid weeks. Dr. Rodriguez monitored the parasite's response to the extreme cold with growing excitement. The combination of the synthetic compound weakening the parasites and the prolonged extreme cold was devastating to the creature populations. "They're dying," she announced during a video conference with researchers around the world. "Not just going dormant, actually dying. The combination treatment is working beyond our best-case scenarios. Field teams reported finding large numbers of dead parasites on the snow around infected animal areas. Animals that had been showing severe symptoms of infestation were beginning to recover their strength and normal behavior. Spirit seemed to sense that something important was happening. He became more alert and active, often standing at the fence of his enclosure and looking toward the wilderness as if listening to something only he could hear. "I think he knows his family is getting better," Sarah told Dr. Rodriguez one morning as they watched Spirit stare intently into the forest. The breakthrough moment came in late February when field teams began finding completely parasite-free animals in areas that had been heavily infested just months earlier. Blood tests confirmed that the synthetic compound had provided lasting immunity, protecting animals even after the initial treatment had been metabolized. By early March, new infections had stopped appearing entirely. The crisis was over. The success in Alaska led to a complete transformation in how wildlife health crises were approached worldwide. The techniques developed during the parasite outbreak became standard protocols for rapid response to emerging wildlife diseases. The international cooperation that had formed during the crisis evolved into permanent collaborative networks between researchers, government agencies, and conservation organizations. Dr. Rodriguez received international recognition for her work, but she always credited Spirit's survival as the key to everything that followed. "Without that one brave little wolf," she said in her acceptance speech for the International Wildlife Conservation Award, "we never would have discovered the threat in time to stop it." Sarah found herself at the center of a new wildlife medicine program funded by governments and conservation organizations around the world. Her clinic was expanded into a full research facility, but she never forgot the simple mission that had started it all: helping animals in need. As spring arrived, the question of what to do with Spirit became pressing. He was now almost a year old and approaching adult size. He was healthy, intelligent, and had formed strong bonds with the humans who had cared for him, but he was still a wild wolf who belonged in the wilderness. The decision was difficult for everyone involved, but especially for Sarah. Spirit had been part of her daily life for almost 6 months. She had watched him grow from a dying pup into a magnificent young wolf. The bond between them was unlike anything she had experienced. Wildlife experts agreed that Spirit should be released back into the wild, but they wanted to monitor his progress carefully. He would be fitted with a special collar that would track his movements and monitor his health remotely. The release was planned for a warm day in early May. Sarah, Dr. Rodriguez, and several other members of the research team gathered in a meadow about 20 miles from where Spirit had originally been found. This area had been completely clear of parasites and showed signs of returning wildlife populations. Spirit seemed to understand what was happening. He had been restless for days, pacing in his enclosure and showing increasing interest in the wild sounds and smells around the clinic. When Sarah opened the transport crate in the meadow, Spirit stepped out cautiously and looked around. For several minutes, he stood perfectly still, processing the sights, sounds, and smells of his natural environment. Then he looked back at Sarah, approached her slowly, and gently nuzzled her hand one final time. "Go on, boy," Sarah whispered, tears in her eyes. "Go find your family." Spirit walked a few steps away, then broke into a run. Within moments, he had disappeared into the forest, free to live the life he was meant to live. The tracking collar provided regular updates on Spirit's progress. He quickly adapted a life in the wild, learning to hunt, and eventually joining a wolf pack in the area. The data from his collar helped researchers understand wolf behavior and movement patterns better than ever before. Years later, Spirit was identified as the father of several litters of healthy wolf pups. His genes, which had provided natural resistance to the parasites, were being passed on to a new generation of wolves. In a very real sense, his survival had not only helped save the wilderness from an ecological disaster, but had also strengthened the wolf population for the future. The parasite crisis had lasted less than a year, but its impact continued to resonate throughout the scientific and conservation communities. It had demonstrated the importance of individual animals in understanding larger ecological threats. It had shown how quickly international cooperation could mobilize when faced with a crisis. And it had proven that sometimes the smallest actions, like one doctor refusing to give up on a dying animal, could have consequences that changed the world. Sarah continued her work at the expanded research facility, now called the Spirit Wildlife Research Center. Every day, she treated animals in need and trained new veterinarians in the techniques that had been developed during the crisis. On her desk, she kept a photograph of Spirit from his release day, a reminder of where it all began. Dr. Rodriguez went on to lead international efforts to prevent wildlife disease outbreaks, using the protocols and relationships established during the Alaska crisis. The early warning systems and rapid response networks she helped develop prevented several other potential ecological disasters in the years that followed. The bait station treatment method became a standard tool for wildlife managers around the world, providing a humane and effective way to deliver medical treatments to wild animal populations without the stress and expense of individual capture and treatment. Most importantly, the crisis had demonstrated the interconnectedness of all life in the wilderness. The near death of one small wolf pup had revealed a threat that could have devastated wildlife across an entire continent. His survival had provided the key to defeating that threat and protecting countless other animals. Spirit's story became legendary in wildlife conservation circles, inspiring a new generation of veterinarians and researchers to pursue careers dedicated to protecting wild animals and their habitats. But for Sarah, his story remained personal, a reminder of why she had chosen to dedicate her life to healing. Every time she heard wolves howling in the mountains around the research center, she wondered if one of those voices belonged to Spirit or one of his descendants. The little wolf who had been saved by human compassion had grown up to help save the wilderness itself, creating a legacy that would protect wildlife for generations to come. The world had changed because one doctor had refused to give up on a dying animal covered in millions of parasites. That change had rippled outward, creating new understanding, new cooperation, and new hope for the future of wildlife conservation. Spirit's rescue had been just the beginning of a transformation that would protect wild places and wild animals far beyond the mountains of Alaska, where his story began.